Hey everyone, this is Gary Buck. We're so glad that you could join us today. I'm the lead pastor at Hopewell, and I am joined by my beautiful wife, Maria. And we're also joined by Wayne and Becky Hedlund. Wayne serves as our executive pastor. And, we just want to take this time to talk about parenting during the pandemic and during all this self-isolation and social distancing. It's interesting, before all this happened, I know I talked to Wayne about us doing a parenting panel sometime, just live and in person at the church, and just kind of address some things that I know parents are dealing with, where parents are always dealing with something with their kids, and we all feel insecure in how we parent, and it's, I think the more we can just talk about those things and bring them out in the open, it helps all of us, and we're a family. So what we wanted to do instead is, we can't obviously meet together, but we thought, we've heard a lot of things from parents just who are struggling during this time and have a lot of questions. And so we thought maybe we could get together and hopefully be a resource to you all. Because being a parent it's easy, right?
Of course.
No, being a parent is really hard. It's really hard. And so, during a pandemic like this, I think it's safe to say everything is kind of exasperated. Everything's kind of heightened. Everything's magnified. Our weaknesses are magnified. Our insecurities are magnified. And so I found this quote by Paul Tripp that I want to read here. He says, "Good parenting lives at the intersection of a humble admission of personal powerlessness," think about that, "and confident rest in the power and grace of God." Let me read that again. Good parenting lives at the intersection of a humble admission of personal powerlessness and a confident rest in the power and grace of God. So good parenting is kind of like where we meet, where we're like, you know what, we are powerless to do this on our own. We cannot be good parents on our own, and it collides at this intersection of God's grace and His power. And I think that during this time, a lot of parents are feeling very powerless, and so. But of course, when we are powerless, we realize we can't do things. We realize how much more we need God. So a number of you at the church and submitted some questions to us, and we're going to get to those and address those back and forth. But before we do so, I thought it'd be good if we just spend a little time just sharing briefly about our own families and our own at-home situations. So Wayne and Becky, why don't you start off and share us a little bit about what's your family look like?
Our family looks very odd. We have kids in the house and kids out of the house. Mm-hmm. So we have a 21-year-old who's actually soon planning on getting married, who's living up in the Rochester area. We have an 18-year-old son who just graduated from high school and started his full-time job. For 1 month, he got to work full-time, and now he's stuck at home with the family that he's living with. And then we have 2 children that are here with us, Derek and Elliot, who are 13 and 11, and Becky homeschools them. So school hasn't changed a whole lot in our home compared to so many others. So anything you want to add?
Yeah, that's good.
And we have 4 children also. Our oldest is 17, and he's a junior. And then we have 2 13-year-olds, 1 boy and 1 girl, and they're in 7th grade. And our youngest is 8, and he's in 3rd grade. And they are all doing online school right now, which we're very thankful for. Normally, they are in public school.
And so obviously, none of us right now have children who are in diapers or preschool. But we've been through that, all of us. But so we're not going to claim to say that we know exactly what it's like during this time having children at that age. So we're not even going to try to pretend that we know what we're talking about there, but we've at least been through it. We've had children at that age. We know what it's like. Of course, we always joke about it. I don't know how you, Wayne, you and Becky feel, but we look back at those years when our kids were in diapers and just the sleepless nights, and it seems like a foggy haze. It's kind of like, how did we get through that?
Right.
And, so
we all survived.
We all survived. So if you're in that stage, this too shall pass. But also, you don't want to just enjoy those years. You don't want to just wish them away and wait till they're older. I used to think that as I remember thinking like, man, we have these children in diapers, and it's like throwing money out the window. Just, yeah. And then I had teenagers, and it's like, oh, that's really throwing money out the window. So every stage has its challenges, but every stage is also beautiful in its own right. So
That's right.
I hope you enjoy it. So as we answer the questions that you all submitted to us again, we're going to try to do it the best we can to address the different ages and hopefully hit wherever you are in your stage of life. But we also have a disclaimer, and that is, of course, we are not perfect parents. We make mistakes. There are days where we feel very inadequate to talk to other parents about parenting, because it's just, if you're a parent of children, unless you have absolutely like Mary Poppins, practically perfect children in every way, like you're just going to feel insecure, and you're going to feel like somehow it's your fault. It's your fault that your child just did something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so and that's okay. We aren't perfect, but we're just going to try to be honest and real with you all. And we're going to share what God has led us to do as families during this time, especially. And so, of course, we're not saying that everything we're going to tell you that we're doing is what you should do, but we're going to share what we've been doing in our experience. And so we've had some great questions submitted to us. But we got a few questions, just so you all know that were great questions, but I think we're going to answer them at some future sessions that weren't quite related to what we're going through right now as a pandemic, but are just really good parenting questions. So maybe when the social distancing is over, we can all get together and have a more general parenting session, which I think would be a lot of fun. So again, the format here is that I'm going to ask a question. I'll present it to Wayne and Becky, and they'll respond, and then we'll have a conversation about it. So here we go. Question number 1. Wayne and Becky, are you enforcing social distancing with your family? How are you handling this? Are your teens frustrated by it, and how are they expressing it? It's a simple one to start with.
Yeah.
But just before she starts, I'll just say, our disclaimer, of course, is the same as yours, right? We definitely feel like parenting is and has always been kind of a daily journey that is new. Mm-hmm. And yesterday, Becky we were joking back and forth and realizing maybe we should tell everybody all the things that we've learned not to do before we talk about the things to do. But that said, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I think you guys will have a great spin on this because you do have teenagers in your home right now, and ours are farther away, which we didn't say with our family. Our older 2 went to public school, 2nd grade and 5th grade, and all the way through. And our younger 2, we've just been homeschooling for the last 3 years. So we've been through Christian school and public school and homeschool. So, but anyway, yeah.
I was going to say, just so you guys know, we should interject here. Our children, we've had children do all 3 as well.
Yeah.
So our oldest actually was the one who did all 3. Our youngest 3 have all been in public school.
Yeah. So for us, I think we've had to deal with it a little bit because our older 2 want to visit during this pandemic. And so our take has been very much personal. If you have peace about a situation for your family, not to get super worked up about what everyone else is doing, but to really just seek the Lord for yourselves and what you have peace about. We have our teenager in New York, and he's living with a family who she's in healthcare, but she takes care of of one girl who's handicapped and is very susceptible to sickness. So she has to be very cautious who they're exposed to right now. If she's exposed, then she can't do her job. So with Ben, they're having him, there's one friend that he has, they get together outside at this big bonfire and they're far apart, but they can see each other face to face. He gets stir crazy. He's very extroverted. He can drive himself, which is a whole other category of teenagers. So he will go on like a drive and just drive for a half an hour and then stop at a friend's and talk in the driveway. So he's doing some of that to help him not go so stir crazy. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but.
Yeah, and Amelia, she's got a little bit of a different take on it. So she's being a little bit more social than Ben is. Ben's like very rules and stuff like that. And of course with them, they don't live in our home. So we don't have as much control over what they're going to do. We're more just trying to influence them. And then we have, I guess you could say, a young teenager. Derek's 13, and then our 11-year-old. So for us, with our younger kids, we had, they want to hang out with the neighborhood kids a little bit. And I felt really bad because one of the neighborhood kids, we were outside playing basketball, and he came over and he just kind of stared at us and just was like really, really, really wanting to play. And he had his ball, and he was like, "Can I play?" And I'm like, "Well, we're still playing." And it was actually awkward for me, And so eventually I came in and I got the hand sanitizer. This was like 3 weeks ago. And I said, "Everybody hand sanitize," and then they played basketball. But then after that, Becky and I talked, and we felt like, we really need to honor, this quarantine a little bit more. So we've communicated with the neighborhood kids. For right now, we're not going to be able to hang out and do that kind of thing nearly as much, So I think that for us, probably the answer is find out what your, standard is as a family and stick with it. And then with the teenagers, who don't necessarily want to stick with that standard, try to maybe work with them, talk to them, make sure they're heard, make sure that when they are expressing their frustration or their anger or their disappointment, or just going stir crazy, as parents, making sure that we're listening to them and acknowledging and, recognizing that it is hard. And then maybe helping them, because as teenagers, more than as young kids, we go from control to influence as they get older. So as teenagers, it's really important that we help them understand what we're doing and why, as opposed to just saying, this is the rule and you better stick with it. So I would recommend that, we emphasize the importance of the quarantine, talk about, how we're really trying to be careful in honoring the other people who are at risk, even if we're not, and maybe even helping them recognize that this is really a terrible sickness. Nobody would want it. And so just walking them through a little bit of how why the quarantine is important and why we set the standards and rules that we did as a family. So
That's good.
Those are some of our thoughts.
Where are you guys at?
We have had fairly strict rules with our children as far as their interactions with others outside our home, but we have allowed them to see friends outside. And, one of our kids has a friend whose house she can walk to, and so they will leave things at each other's doors. And so we've tried to allow them some ways of connecting with their friends, but in a way that is still keeping social distancing rules in play. With our oldest, because he can drive, he has made some choices that we didn't necessarily agree with, nothing major, but we just talked to him about the reasons why that maybe wasn't the wisest choice, and then sort of allowed him to ultimately make the choice whether or not to do it again, so that he understands the reason behind it and how we feel about it, but that ultimately he could do whatever he wanted.
And I think that the thing that's tricky too about this is that it's not like we live in a community kind of where there's lots of homes right around us. So it's not like everyone has a sign outside their house says, "Hey, here's the rules we're following," or "Here's how we're doing it." And so everyone's very different with it. It's always a little bit awkward. It's like our kids have friends right here in the neighborhood, down various places. So it's like, do you always want to put someone in a tough position to say like, "Hey, so what are you doing? Are we allowed to stand here at your door? Should we stand down at the driveway? Should we spray ourselves down first before we even come 50 yards of you? What should we do?" And so I think what you and Becky said is good too. And I would double emphasize this, that this is an amazing opportunity for us to teach our children how to honor other people. Mm-hmm. And it's not just honoring those who are at risk too. To me, it's like, there are people that I know personally who are all over the spectrum on how they respond to this. Some people think it's a conspiracy. Some people think that there's no danger at all. Some people are thinking like this whole thing is going to destroy the country. So when you're dealing with people of that kind of spectrum, I think a way that we can honor people is like, even if you disagree with them, even if you say, you know what, I don't think it's that big of a deal personally, this virus. But if your neighbor does, then a way to honor them is to bless them by not, coming into their house or asking them or putting them in an awkward position where they're, not when that. So I mean, we quick story. We some of you may know this, but Maria's uncle, Bruce, he passed away recently, just last week or so, and the day before he passed away, we have a lot of extended family that live in the area, and we actually gathered around outside his bedroom window, and we all stood 6 feet apart, and we sang hymns to him outside of his bedroom window. So we didn't go in the house,
That's nice.
And so it's like, those are the kind of things where I think our children hopefully will always remember that. Like it's even if we go in the house, that's unique, but even we went that kind of, it's a way to go the extra mile to even honor. We were honoring not only him in the house, but we were honoring the other people in that circle of family, who probably all have different views on what's going on with the virus. We were all honoring each other by also standing apart as well, even those who disagree with it. And so I think that communicates to our children just what honoring really means. And so that's how I view the social distancing part, is that it's a wonderful opportunity for us to teach that to our children, just what honor is.
I really like that, Pastor Gary. Also, just honoring our leaders too. And I think one of the hard things about honoring our leaders is still, listening to what they say, and even if we disagree, still being willing to step into what they're asking of us. And so this is an opportunity as a family to honor our leaders. And when I say our leaders, our government leaders and different things, even though we may or may not fully agree with them. And I think that's a great example that we can give to our teens and to our kids, and also encourage them to maybe give to their peers and friends too. So.
Any other comments? Okay. All right, let's move on to question number 2. This is a good one. The question says, my kids are constantly on screens now, much more than before. And it's not just video games and movies. They're on screens for school. They're on screens video chatting with friends. Should I count that as, quote, screen time and count it against their regularly scheduled video game and movie time? In other words, is all screen time created equally? So this is a really interesting question. And as we are talking across screens right now, is this counting as our screen time? So Wayne and Becky, do you want to take this one?
So we actually kind of agree to disagree on this topic in our home, because I'm a little more, I don't love all of the screen time. And so Wayne's perspective, which I guess you can share if I share it wrong, but is very much, he tends to, I think he has a good perspective. And I do agree when I hear him. So that's why we kind of have figured it out and compromised. But like when our kids are on video games with friends and they're talking and interacting and figuring things out together, we feel like that's social. When they're doing school or educational things, whether it's watching something or doing something online, we view that differently. If they're reading on their screens because they have Kindles, that is a different category to us. So we do separate it. Like just sitting and watching a movie that's just for entertainment is very different to us than being with friends or having interaction. Same with video games. If they're just doing it alone and they're focused on something very private, it feels very different than if they are on headsets and talking or seeing a friend at the same time. So that's where we've landed. Our kids probably do way too much screen time for everyone else's taste. But we feel like as long as if we don't notice behavioral changes, like sometimes I'll see little things where they're more on edge or less focused or something like that. And I'll think, let's go back on screen time and see if that helps. So if we see some behavioral things involved with it, or if they're not able to disengage from screen and then come in and play a board game with us or talk with us or be with us, and something's really off, it feels like for us. Do you have something?
Yeah, I don't think screen time should replace family time, friend time, time with the Lord, time with one another, family time. All those things are important. But I also think that we live in a world where screen has become more and more kind of part of our living, part of our world. And so kind of like what Becky said, is the approach that I think we do take it, especially during a season where kids can't necessarily spend as much time social with other kids, or they're stuck at home, or they can't go out and do the things that they maybe would have been able to do before. So for us and for me, not all screen time is created equal. I don't think it should replace time with friends and, time doing other things. The one thing that I'll add though is, well, first of all, I'll just say, and we do encourage our kids to get off the screen and do other things, and
Get outside.
just a couple of, every day they're going outside and doing things. And just the other day, I was like, boys, you guys haven't been on your bikes in a while. You need to get on your bikes and go for a bike ride. And they're like, we don't want to go for a bike ride. Too bad. Go for a bike ride, get out there and get on your bikes. And they got on their bikes and actually stayed out there for a long time and had fun. They just needed to kind of get broken out of whatever rut that they were in with that. But I'll just add, I think for this season, this pandemic, when everyone's kind of walking through this a little bit in a different time and season, I would just say, I think it's wise for us to lean more towards grace and less towards rules whenever we can in the home, because everyone's just a little bit off balance already because of everything that's going on. Emotions are a little bit different. People are just a little bit feeling like, why is everything so different? And so my personal advice, lean towards grace when it comes to what we're doing in the home rather than towards rules, at least for this season. And that's just our input, my thoughts. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, similar to you, Becky, I think we've had agree to disagree moments with the screens in our house as well. I tend to agree with what you guys are saying, as far as I don't personally believe all screens are created equally, or all screen time is created equally. Because I do think that, yeah, if they're talking to their friends over, FaceTime or something like that, doing something social, I mean, our kids are starving to see their friends. And so I don't necessarily count that the same way as I would if they were playing Mario Kart or some other just solo video game. Or even like if we were watching America's Funniest Home Videos the other night. So we were doing that as a whole family, and we're all just laughing, having a great time watching some good, clean entertainment. And but that's different than just one kid sitting on in a chair watching whatever movie they want to watch by themselves. There is something about that, about doing something as a family that feels corporate and communal, as opposed to just private. And I got my headphones on and I'm just in my own world. That being said, I tend to say to my kids that, even though you're talking to your friends, I do think in some respect, though, screen time is screen time, in that we know that, scientists have shown that, just being on a screen does do something to your brain, though. It does wire your brain in a different way. It's stimulating to your actual senses, your eyes and your brain. And so the total amount of screen time, though, I guess would say it does impact that. You can't get around that. And so this is one of those things where it's like, I wonder what I would say about all this if we're still experiencing this like 3 or 4 months from now. Like, I agree with you, Wayne, as far as like having a little more grace right now. But as time goes on, if this goes on for a lot longer, hopefully it won't. But if it did, do we have to start pulling things back a little bit more? But yeah, I think it's of course monitoring screen usage in our house has been tricky too, because they're all on computers for school, and then some of them have personal devices that and so it can be a headache trying to monitor who's on what at what time, and have 4 kids, and yeah, it's hard. So, yeah.
I think another thing to just try to be aware of is how much they are going to it because it's just like their natural inclination. I know, our kids, I often say, like, would you cry if I took your Bible from you? No, because you don't, unfortunately have the hunger for the Word of God that you do for your screen. So just trying to watch how much it's just part of what they feel like they need to have for the day, versus just, a part of their day, or, a fun thing to do. It shouldn't be the goal of their day.
Yeah.
So navigating that is extremely hard.
Yeah.
We had I don't know if you guys experience this, but we'll often say, hey, you have this much amount of screen time, and when we say that, we often mean like, whether that's your personal time. We often refer to that as like screen time. But the other night was like we'd done something as a family, and it was, I don't remember what we're doing, but it was like 9:30 at night, and our youngest son's like, all right, I'm gonna go down and play video games now. We're like, no, you're going to bed. He's like, but I didn't have to get like 20 minutes left of my screen time, or he had in his head that he didn't do it throughout the day. So therefore, then it was his God-given right that he should have his own personal screen time before he goes to bed, no matter what time of the day it was. Right. And so I think we are fighting a battle as far as, especially in our American culture in general, of screens and internet, and it's like the baseline standard of your rights. Like, you have a right to have all these things, and so we're fighting that now. I think just to a whole new level, in isolation.
I think it's important too to be good role models as parents. So, if I'm constantly on my device, then I'm not setting a good example for them.
Yeah. It's just a personal confession moment. Like, we got on one of our kids for having his phone out at the table while he was eating a meal by himself, and it was like, he just not sit at the table eating it. Why have to be on a screen? So we told him to put it away. And then I sat down like half an hour later, and I got out my phone and was checking email, and it just, no one said anything to me, but I was like, I'm doing exactly what he. So Maria's right, and it's hard for all of us, but
very true.
Yeah, if we're gonna preach it, we gotta do it. So our kids are not blind. They know when we're hypocrites. So.
And they tell us.
Yes, they do.
I know for our teenagers who are now young adults, there were a few seasons where Becky or I were able to go, wait a second, this is becoming unhealthy. They were super involved in, a particular screen or just a screen in general. And there were seasons where we just said, okay, we're taking a break now for a while. And we never really regretted that.
You mean time-wise or?
Time-wise, or what apps they were using, or different things
little
like that. So with Facebook for a while, with one of our kids, it was becoming way too much and different things. So the idea of just recognizing, is this healthy or unhealthy, I think is good for us to have that intuition and listen to it and respond if we need to.
Good.
And we started with our 13-year-old, especially, just to kind of communicate about screen time. Like, we'll maybe pick some blocks of time during the day where we'll say, none of us in the family are going to do screen time during these particular hours, which gives you all these other hours. Maybe you could squeeze it in if you're not outside or doing other things. And that's been helpful. And also using it to teach them to be honoring about other families, and saying, because we'll hear so-and-so gets to do such and such. And we'll say, each family is different. Everyone's doing it different. And we do what we feel we need to, and we honor our friends too. But
every kid's wired differently, and some kids are more prone, some people are more prone to be addicts. So it's definitely something that we can become addicted to. So all right, question number 3. What are some creative ways that we can have our kids think of others and show them love during this very isolated, self-centered time? That's a good question. What do you guys think?
I mean, I think you guys already touched on this a little, where your daughter's like leaving her friend some gifts on the porch, or doing little things for each other. Writing letters, the lost art of letter writing. I think, especially grandparents and things like that, or elderly. I know Pastor Kobe has given out addresses and different things for kids to write letters. That's a way to say they're going to love getting this in the mail, just like you love getting a card, or that type of thing. And also maybe encouraging them, if there's someone they want to pray for, it just causes them to be aware, other people are out there and they need prayer. And then also maybe encouraging, like, to reach out in some way. If you're okay with screens, they could text a friend, or they could FaceTime a friend. I know Evan texted Derek on his birthday during quarantine, and that was really sweet and special and meant a lot. And so that was a neat thing that he did, and things like that. Maybe we're not super great at that, so maybe you guys can go. We're introverts.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a world out there. Oops.
And recognizing our kids too, like Derek and Elliot, our two younger kids, they're just very content. Especially Derek, he's very introverted. And so he doesn't feel as much of a need to reach out to other people. And so reminding them, and like Becky just reminded him the other day to reach out to his cousin, haven't heard from him in a while, see how he's doing. And so sometimes pushing them a little bit outside their comfort zone to reach out to other people, I think is good and wise too. And of course, taking advantage of all of our technology. Just tell them to do more screen. I'm just joking. Well, I mean video, try to do video chats or phone calls, those kinds of things. So.
I think I don't want to give too many examples because I think it's important to let kids come up with their own. I think it means so much more than, saying, well, we heard this family was doing this, so let's try it. But yeah, we did do something fun over Easter for a few families that had younger kids. We wore gloves, and I actually boiled money in water, and we filled eggs with money, and we put eggs in their yards when their kids didn't know about it.
That's cool.
I'm not a huge Easter egg fan, but that was our way of reaching out and blessing those families. And our kids had a good time doing it. And some of them even contributed some of their own money. So that was, one thing that we had come up with based on something else that a friend had told me she was doing. It was somewhat similar. I also, I enjoy baking, and our daughter does too. And some of our boys do too. But I made something for a bunch of neighbors, and I knew some would be fine with it. I mean, I still wore a mask and gloves and didn't touch the food. But for the one that I thought would be most concerned, I just said, I had my daughter put it on their porch, and I texted and just said, there's something on your porch. We didn't touch it. But if that makes you nervous, just know that we're thinking about you, so that they knew, they didn't feel guilty not eating it, but it was just a way to reach out. So I think it's the spirit behind it more than, what it actually is. So.
And I think a good question that you can ask your family is just sit around dinner table and say, hey everyone, what's one way we can be generous? What does that look like? I mean, generosity can come in all different forms, but I think what happens is that during times like this, and whenever people experience any kind of a hardship, we tend to become withdrawn, and we think like, okay, how can I take care of myself? How can I? And that's just very natural. But we think like, what can I do to prevent or to minimize the impact or the damage that I'm feeling right now? But of course, and I've said this many times, but I just always look back to Jesus on the cross. Like here he is hanging there in excruciating pain and dying, and he's taking care of his mother and making sure that there's someone there to take care of his mother. So he was thinking about someone else and being generous as he's dying. And so, during a pandemic, when we're isolated, my natural tendency is to think like, okay, how can I take care of my family? What can we do? What projects can we do? How can we make sure we're entertained? How can the needs, the spiritual needs and physical needs of my family be met? But there's something that I think that this is an amazing opportunity for us, I think, to really show how can we be generous to someone else. And that means, asking, hey, anyone need toilet paper? I don't know. I mean, again, I agree with Maria. You don't necessarily have to give a lot of examples here. Because you guys might do something very different than what we do. Needs are different, and trust that God through His Holy Spirit will speak to each of our families in their own way. So, but I think that if we ask the question, how can we be generous? It takes away the spirit of religion out of it, of like, well, we must do this, 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 and this. It's more like, hey, how can we be generous? Let's be open. Maybe God's calling us to do something specific, and maybe He doesn't, want you to do anything more than just pray. I don't know. I mean, who knows? But the point is, I think if you as a family open your hearts to God and ask that question, who knows what your kids will say. And I think maybe your kids will surprise you. So even very young children have wonderful, wonderful days. So yeah. Anything else? Okay. The fourth question, I think we have 2 more questions still here. Yeah. So the fourth question, I struggle sometimes with what I call mom guilt. I'm with my kids now 24/7, and sometimes I'm sitting right next to them, but I'm not really engaging with them. There is no way for my husband and me to get a babysitter or just for me to get alone time by myself and not feel guilty for abandoning my kids. Should I feel guilty when I try to escape and have, quote, me time? It feels unfair to the kids. So I think this is a great question that someone submitted to us, and it's I think probably a lot of people are struggling with guilt right now in general. I think that there's employees that feel guilty for maybe not doing enough work or not working to the level they usually do, or maybe spouses feel guilty for not giving their spouse enough time that they usually give them, or or they're not, maybe we're not as kind as we usually are, or whatever it is, fill in the blank. But the list goes on. But I think guilt can take you one of 2 ways. It can take you towards correcting your path if you feel like you are on the wrong path, or guilt just turns into shame, and then you just kind of wallow in it. So what do you guys think? What's the answer to this question? I'm sure you have a perfect answer ready to go.
Well, I just have to confess I've never had mom guilt, but but I have dealt with guilt. So
Okay. All right. And you're qualified to speak on it.
Yeah.
Did you have some thoughts?
I mean, I think this is like what you were kind of saying, Gary. I think it's personal. Sometimes you're feeling guilt because there is something you're not doing that it might be great to schedule in or figure out what you need to be doing. And sometimes you're just being really hard on yourself. I think something personal for me I've had to really watch is what I'm saying to myself during this season, especially because, like you shared at the beginning, everything's magnified. So I'm focused a lot on everything I'm doing wrong, as opposed to giving myself any credit for something I'm doing right. Mm-hmm. I think there just needs to be a lot of grace, even if like what the topic before about what are we doing for others, we can really guilt ourselves, like, well, I'm not doing anything to get my kids to reach out. But like for me, I tell Wayne sometimes, I think I have Sunday and then like the second day, and then it's Sunday, church again. Like the Monday through Saturday is sort of running all together. And sometimes my weeks are going by so fast that I get at the end, I'm like, what did I really, like, I've accomplished a lot, but yet it all blurs, and it's a lot of pressure to be focused on everyone else and your kids and school for some people and all of that. But mom guilt is real. It's like that airplane analogy. If the mask falls down because something's going to go bad, put it on yourself, because if you don't, you won't have it to give to your child or someone around you. And taking care of yourself really will give you energy to focus on your kids. If I'm exercising, kind of watching what I'm eating, taking alone time, because I'm an introvert, I feel very guilty to take time alone. I actually talked about somebody about this in the fall for myself, because I'm just going kind of crazy because I need time alone, but then I get alone and I'm like, I should be with everybody. And I just had to give myself permission to say, I need to be alone for just a little bit to regroup so that I can actually focus and listen and pay attention, because I'm not so on edge with everybody when I'm with them. So I don't know if it's possible for this mom to carve out alone time or talk to her husband about being alone. That might help. I don't know. But Maria, what do you have?
I've definitely been in seasons where I felt very much stuck with all of my kids all the time. And so I think that's something that's very real and very important to address and recognize. I don't think my mental health was in a very good place at times in the past, right? Mm-hmm. So I have had to learn that it's quite fine to find ways of doing things for myself or being by myself. I'm also an introvert, so I definitely need time to be alone. And I think it's important to recognize it and then just let the guilt go, and find ways of it being intentional when you can be with your kids all the time, but not with them in the sense of giving them your attention and focus. So I think it's good if you can intentionally give them time, but then intentionally not give them time, and have them recognize that, right now mom is going to do this, and if it's an emergency, you can come to me, but otherwise just please, stay out of my room or the bathroom or wherever you need to be, my closet, and teach them, what that looks like. Because I think it's an important boundary for them to learn as well, that, you need to be alone sometimes. And then, of course, for parents to do the same for their children, if they need some alone time, it needs to be respected from you to them. But so for moms with younger kids that feel like they really can't get away from them, because when you have teenagers, it's pretty easy to get away from them. It's actually sometimes hard to
Just lock them in the basement.
That definitely shifts over the seasons. But yeah, I think it's good to teach them and instruct them what it looks like for you to take time away, whether you're, physically away, or you just say, right now I'm sitting on the couch, but I'm going to focus on my book or my phone or my computer. And, again, come to me if there's an emergency, and then ask God for the grace and patience to teach them, what emergency actually means, because that may take some training, or it will take some training.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think communication is the key here. I understand that for really little kids, that may be really difficult. But I don't think, if you're meeting their needs and you are with them, and in your heart that you are providing for them, and you're there for them, and you're spending so much time with them, there is nothing wrong with, like I think Becky, you said, and you've got to get refueled though. Like you have to, or you're gonna have nothing to give them. So I think you'll know if the guilt is something that's like, yeah, you're really doing something wrong, versus shame. That's not, you're not supposed to live there in shame. So now, if you just sit them in front of Netflix all day and you're by yourself, and you're making lattes, and you've read 5 books in that day, then there probably is some good healthy guilt there. But I think you'll know, and just ask God and His Spirit to show you. Because that's the thing here, is that we can't tell anyone, no, don't feel guilty for what you're doing, because we don't really know what you're doing. So we're just trusting that the Spirit of God will lead you in that, and He'll speak to you. And but you're gonna have to take a little alone time to listen and find out what He's saying. So, anything else? Good.
Just give yourself permission, right? Give yourself permission, I think, is what all of you have said, and then just grace during this time, and recognize that, we're not going to always get it right, but that's okay.
Yeah.
So.
All right, here's our last question. It's easy for kids to pick up on fear and anxiety. They see people walking around with masks on. They hear about the death totals. They know something is different, no matter what age they are, really. What are some practical ways that you can help your children find peace? So this is really a question. And just before I forget, our children's pastor, Kobe Martin, did a video addressing this a little bit, actually talking to kids and to parents. And I think it's really important that parents not ignore it, that we do acknowledge these things up front. So Wayne and Becky, what are your thoughts on this?
You have some thoughts?
Yeah. I always have thoughts. That's the problem. Yeah.
That's good.
I mean, I think if it's possible to limit some of their exposure, they maybe don't have to know everything that's happening or watch the news every day or that type of thing. That's just a practical way to try to alleviate some of it. But I know that's really hard to do in some homes and with different ages of kids and different dynamics. Also, I think I think this theme of grace is good, because I think our kids are expressing their fear and anxiety in a lot of ways that we're not aware of. Like Elliot, we have been home. Wayne is pretty much working from home. Now, granted, he's mostly down in the basement because this is where, he can be alone most of the day, but our kids are seeing him like come up for lunch or do this or that. And Elliot made a comment. We had to go take him keys because he locked himself out of the car at the post office. And when we pulled in, Elliot was like, "Oh, it's so good to see Dad." And I was like, you just saw him like 10 minutes ago, and he's been around a lot. But so it just kind of showed his thinking, like something's different, and he gets that something's different, but he doesn't quite. He's our youngest, and so that type of thing. And also they've taken to following me around the house a lot again, like when they were toddlers, and there's weird things happening, and I think they do have fear and anxiety. And we've just kind of been talking to them about Philippians and chapter 4, where it says, you know, talk to God about whatever it is, if it's something's bothering you or you're wanting something. And then that idea of being thankful for anything you can think of to be thankful for, and then God's peace, which is just, you'll feel calm. And the Lord has really been meeting us there, like meeting our kids in that, where they're feeling it and sensing it. And it's really up to him, because we can't make that happen. But that's really just kind of helped in some ways. I don't know.
And a lot of fear and anxiety in general, a lot of it has to do with the stories that we're telling ourselves. So, you know, we can feed fear and we can feed anxiety with the things that feed them, you know, the worries of this world, and, you know, or we can feed fear and anxiety, hope and peace and truth and those kinds of things. And so I think of, there have been different times where one of my kids will have a nightmare, or they'll call me in, or call one of us in to say, I can't sleep, I'm having fearful thoughts. And a lot of times what I'll do in those moments is I'll just say, what can we think about? What else can we think about? How can we replace the fearful thoughts that you have with something that's positive and that's good? And to be honest with you, I think that with anxiety, that's a big, big part of it. We can choose to have the mind of Christ. We can choose to say, let's think of truth and of the good things in this world, and replace the anxiety and the fear with those things, and not to discount them, not to say this is not scary. I don't think that that's appropriate at all, but to recognize, wow, this is weird, this is odd, this is anxiety provoking, but, and then the but turns to, but God, you know, and thinking of who we are in him, thinking of there is hope in him, you know, all of these things. I think replacing those anxious stories with the good stories, I think, is an important tool that everybody should have, not just during this season. So,
and distracting is always good. Like you guys talked about watching the funniest home videos, like little anything you can do to get the kids to laugh and to just think about something else that's fun and funny. That usually kind of helps too.
Yeah, distractions can be good, and I think. But, you know, what's interesting is that I think that in some ways, and I'm guilty of this, we can become a counting sheep society. And that I mean, like, in other words, how do we go to sleep at night? Well, we can count sheep, which is just a mindless, there's nothing really entertaining or even intellectually stimulating or interesting about sheep. Like, they're just dumb animals, and we're just going to count them in our heads for that. And then that's how we're supposed to fall asleep. And I think in some ways, as a society, that's kind of, it's like we tend to skew or run towards the things that numb, and that's what counting sheep is. But what you said, Wayne, I think if we can, according to the scripture, say, set our sights on things above, you know, like think about godly things, and replace those anxious thoughts with good thoughts, not just counting sheep. You know, and I think that's helpful for me at night. I've had nights where I've had hard time going to sleep, even during the stretch. And so I'll find myself sometimes, like, I gotta, like, again, I use that scripture also, like taking every thought captive, you know, making it obedient to Christ. And okay, let me just think now, what does that mean? That doesn't mean just counting sheep. That means let me think on good things. And be like you see throughout the scriptures, that God, when people were going through anxious times, he would remind them of his works. He would remind them of his faithfulness. And so I think that's important for all of us. And if you remember that, maybe you can pass it on to our children. And like a lot of times when my kids are in bed, and not just during this time, but, you know, like similar to you guys shared, they have a hard time going to sleep, or they're scared, you know, I'll kind of take them to a different place, like verbally, like I'll say, hey, do you remember when we did this? And we'll take them to a good place, you know, or let's go on vacation to Maine right now, or where we go off in the summer, and I'll say, hey, remember what it's like to go down to the dock, or be on the trampoline, or swim in the water, look for frogs, whatever it is that takes them to a different place, and is good thoughts. But again, how much greater if we can take them to think about the things of God and his faithfulness, and remind them those seasons of our lives. So yeah.
I think it's really important that all of us, parents and our children, recognize that there is a lot of grief during this season. There's a lot of loss, and there are things that we are not getting to experience that we want to experience, or that we are experiencing that we didn't want to experience. And so as we ourselves walk through, the patterns, and we might feel angry and then depressed, and, eventually, learn our new normal, and we've accepted certain things, that we recognize those patterns in our children, and we don't discount them, but we allow them to share them, and then we explain to them why they, might be feeling that way. Even, matching them, saying, wow, you sound really angry about that. That really makes me angry too, that you're not going to get to have that event that you were so looking forward to, whatever it is. It's really important that we do that, rather than, tell them not to worry about it, because I don't think that that's helpful for their emotional well-being.
Validation, I think, is very important. You're right.
I think it's also really important to understand that fear can look like a lot of different things. It's usually ugly in some way, but it can be, physically, it comes out, or emotionally in our words, it comes out. And, of course, the same is true of our kids. So, every day that can be the case, but especially during this time. So if there are things where, it seems like your child is being very willfully disobedient, it might be because they're just really afraid of whatever you're asking them to do, or that's something that they're afraid of related to this whole quarantine is coming out in whatever you're asking them to do. So to recognize that, oh, what's under this yucky looking behavior is fear, and we address the fear rather than just, punishing them for what they just did or said, so that we can help them walk through that and not just give them a punishment and, think it'll be better. So yeah, just look for what's fear driven rather than sinful.
Yeah. And last thing I would just say is just, we really just have to watch what we say around the dinner table. I know I caught myself a couple times, like I was kind of talking to Maria and saying, yeah, I just heard that so many people died yesterday, or this has happened yesterday. And then it's like, why am I talking about this in front of the kids? I don't really need to hear all this. I mean, especially the younger ones, but, and then also, like, be careful too. I would suggest, watch how much you play the blame game. Like start blaming governments or, countries or politicians, or it's like, it's not really going to help. And because that's also just teaching them a lesson about how we deal with conflict or crisis. Is that, like, well, let's start with blaming people as opposed to, like, pursuing peace and what God would have us do. So yeah. Anything else?
I really liked what you said, Maria, about the whole thing with paying attention to what the root is with our kids and their behaviors, and especially with teenagers. Sometimes our teenagers would come home from school and dump about something, and their language or their attitude or what they're saying is not pleasant and maybe not what we would want in our home. And yet for us, it was more important to listen to what their heart was. And sometimes we agreed with them. A teacher really didn't handle something well, or we disagreed, but we said, we understand why you might feel that way, and just really allow them to have their feelings in it and not punish necessarily their behavior or their attitude or even the disrespect in that moment. A lot of it isn't even personal when they express all of that. It's really something else coming out. And when they feel heard, when we've said, don't be so disrespectful and don't talk like that and watch your language and all of those things, we get nowhere. But when we listen to all of that and process with them, then often they'll calm, and eventually sometimes we'd even get I'm sorry, I said such and such, or whatever, and sometimes not. But especially, with our teens as well as the kids, really paying attention that there is a root of something, and maybe not focus on the behavior so much in this particular season, is to try to get to that heart of the matter, like what you were sharing. That's really powerful.
Well, I think it's important to see ourselves and how we're responding too, because there are times where I know where I've responded very poorly to Gary or to our kids because of something that had nothing to do with them. So if we're carrying a lot of fear or anxiety about what's going on with our job or our finances or the world in general, or someone, outside of our home, and the people in our home don't know that, then it can be very detrimental to, the environment of our home. So even if you need to say, I'm sorry, I'm just really concerned about, so-and-so, or about something that's happening with my job. I didn't mean to take it out on you. That's just a good example for them to know that sometimes that happens and we regret what we say, but that it's not their fault, that, really wasn't about what they just did. We were just already kind of at our tipping point, and then they just sort of set us over because they spilled their milk or whatever.
Yeah.
It's good. Well, this has been good. I thank you guys. Let me just end reading a scripture here from Psalm 78, and then I'd just like to pray a prayer blessing over the families and the parents watching here. Psalm 78 reads this: "O my people, listen to my instructions. Open your ears to what I am saying, for I will speak to you in a parable. I will teach you hidden lessons from our past, stories we have heard and known, stories our ancestors handed down to us. We will not hide these truths from our children. We will tell the next generation about the glorious deeds of the Lord, about his power and his mighty wonders. For he issued his laws to Jacob. He gave his instructions to Israel. He commanded our ancestors to teach them to their children, so the next generation might know them, even the children not yet born, and they in turn will teach their own children. So each generation should set its hope anew on God, not forgetting his glorious miracles and obeying his commands." And I think that's really a lot of what we're talking about here, is that we're passing on things to our children, and it's not just our words, it's not just our actions, but we're passing on what he's saying here is the glorious deeds of God's faithfulness. We talked about that, like, what do you say to your kids when they're in bed and they're having a hard time going to sleep? This is what we're doing. And so parents, you have an amazing opportunity here to teach kids about the glorious faithfulness of God. And remember that what you're doing right now will not just impact your children right now for the season, but it could impact their children, so that when they go through something with their children 20, 30 years from now, maybe it's a different pandemic or just something else, who knows what's going to happen, that they'll be able to look back on this time and say, you know what my parents did for me, and this is how they got us through, and they have a model to look after. And so what you're doing right now could have an impact for generations to come. So no pressure, but it really is true. God's with us, and he will sustain us and bless us. So let me just pray a blessing over us, and we'll end our time here. So Father, we thank you so much for your word. We thank you for your Holy Spirit. And right now I just pray that you would bless every parent who's been with us here during this time together. Lord, bless them in their weakness, in their insecurities. Lord, bless them and remind them of your promises. Remind them of who they are in you. And I pray that you would lead them as they make unique decisions and parenting choices for their families. God, the things that we've done in our families may not be what you want them to do in their families. And so lead them, God, give them your spirit of discernment, Father, that they would know what's right, what's wrong for their families. And Lord, I also pray you give the parents courage. Give them courage to make tough decisions sometimes, even if it's not popular with their children. And Father, I pray that you bring unity amongst husbands and wives. Bless them and their relationships with each other. Lord, I pray for every single parent right now, Lord, that you would just bless them with a completely new understanding of what it means that you are with them and that you are their friend, and strengthen them during this even more isolated season. And Lord, just be our strength, be our hope, be our joy. God, we need you, and we thank you for your faithfulness. So bless us as we lead this generation, the next generation, and that they too would be a blessing to the generations to come. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.